مهاجمة قوات
شباب، في عندنا قصف يا شباب. قصف جديد يا شباب، قصف جديد ما بنهيئة الأركان خالص.
Syria's military nerve center wiped out in a lightning-fast Israeli strike that killed 3 and wounded 34 in mere seconds. Early Wednesday morning, Israel unleashed their most devastating attack on Damascus, and this time, they brought something that changed everything. At least 4 precision strikes screamed through Syrian airspace toward the defense ministry and presidential palace, but these weren't ordinary airstrikes. The Israeli Air Force had just deployed their most advanced capabilities, surgical strikes that Syria's compromised defense systems simply couldn't stop. Is Israel protecting minorities or violating Syria's sovereignty? Drop your opinion in the comments. This debate is about to get intense. What really triggered Israel to launch strikes directly into Damascus? This wasn't random. 700,000 Syrian Druze suddenly found themselves caught in a deadly crossfire that nobody saw coming. The violence exploded so fast that over 250 people were killed in just 72 hours of sectarian warfare. Israeli intelligence had been monitoring the situation for weeks, watching as ancient feuds between Druze militias and Bedouin tribes spiraled completely out of control. But that's when things took a dark turn. Syrian government forces moved in, and what happened next shocked everyone. The Druze community, who'd maintained autonomy for decades, suddenly faced a choice between submission to Syria's new Islamic government or total annihilation. Israel saw an opportunity and took it. This wasn't about protection. This was about reshaping the entire southern Syrian landscape while the world's attention focused elsewhere. Damascus erupted in flames as Israeli jets delivered their message with devastating precision. A Syrian television anchor was broadcasting live when the Ministry of Defense exploded behind him, forcing him to dive for cover as debris rained down. The strikes weren't random. Israel targeted the exact entrance of Syria's military headquarters and launched another strike dangerously close to the presidential palace. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz posted the footage online with a chilling message that sent shockwaves through the region. The warnings in Damascus have ended, now painful blows will come. Within minutes, he shared another post showing the exact moment of impact, captioned simply, "The painful blows have begun." But these weren't just military targets. Witnesses described fireballs illuminating Damascus skies as civilian areas shook from the explosions. The precision was surgical, but the message was brutal. Syria's new leaders were being told in no uncertain terms that their attempts to control the Druze regions would come at a devastating cost. The Druze community now faces an impossible dilemma that's tearing families apart. This ancient religious minority of 1 million people, spread across Syria, Lebanon, and Israel, suddenly became pawns in a larger game. In unprecedented scenes, hundreds of Israeli Druze actually broke through border fences to cross into Syria, desperate to help their relatives under attack. Israel quickly announced secret medical evacuations, treating wounded Syrian Druze in Israeli hospitals, something unthinkable just months ago. Underground support networks emerged overnight as Israeli Druze, many serving in elite military units, coordinated aid for their Syrian brothers. Women and children from Damascus suburbs were quietly relocated to Israeli-controlled areas. The community that had historically rejected Israeli overtures was now forced to reconsider everything. Some Druze leaders publicly distanced themselves from Israeli help, fearing it would paint targets on their backs. Others whispered that without Israeli intervention, their complete destruction was inevitable. Families argued over accepting Israeli medical treatment while their villages burned. Behind the strategic strikes and military maneuvers, real people paid the price. A Syrian family in Damascus shared their terrifying experience as their apartment windows shattered from the ministry explosion nearby. The mother described how her children screamed as the building shook violently, thinking their home would collapse. In Suwayda, the human cost became even more personal when Syrian government forces committed an act that shocked the entire Druze community. They forcibly shaved a respected Druze sheikh's mustache, a deliberate humiliation in Arab culture that sparked outrage. Children in Suwayda found themselves trapped between gunfire from 3 different factions, with schools converted to shelters and hospitals overwhelmed with casualties. One Druze fighter described finding 21 bodies after government-linked forces conducted field executions in civilian areas. A grandmother wept as she recounted how her family was split, some fleeing to Israel's border, others refusing to leave their ancestral lands. The statistics said 250 dead, but each number represented shattered families and communities that might never recover. These weren't just casualties of war, they were victims of a conflict where sectarian hatred mixed with geopolitical ambitions. The international community scrambled to contain a crisis spinning out of control. United States Secretary of State Marco Rubio took to social media with an urgent announcement. "We have agreed on specific steps that will bring this troubling and horrifying situation to an end tonight." Behind closed doors, American diplomats worked frantically, conducting what Rubio called constant talks with both Israeli and Syrian officials. But America wasn't the only power player involved. Turkey, Syria's strongest ally, condemned Israel's strikes as an act of sabotage against Syria's efforts to secure peace, stability, and security. The Turkish Foreign Ministry's statement revealed deeper tensions. Ankara had invested heavily in Syria's new government and saw Israeli actions as deliberately undermining their influence. Meanwhile, Russia found itself in an impossible position, trying to balance its historical support for Syria with its complex relationship with Israel. Moscow's silence spoke volumes. They issued no strong condemnation, no threats of retaliation. Putin's calculation was clear: avoid being dragged into another Middle Eastern quagmire while maintaining influence with all sides. Even Saudi Arabia jumped in, condemning Israel's blatant attacks and calling for international action. The regional chess game intensified as each power maneuvered for advantage while Syrian civilians paid the price. The highway kidnapping that ignited this powder keg seemed minor at first, just another robbery on the Damascus-Suwayda road. But when Bedouin fighters intercepted and robbed a Druze merchant, they unknowingly lit a fuse that would explode across southern Syria. Druze militias retaliated by kidnapping several Bedouins, triggering a vicious cycle of revenge abductions that nobody could stop. Ancient feuds between these communities, suppressed for years under Assad's iron grip, erupted with shocking violence under Syria's new Islamic government. The Damascus suburb, home to thousands of Bedouins, came under heavy shelling from Druze forces. What began as tit-for-tat kidnappings escalated into full-scale warfare with modern weapons. Then came the horror that stunned even hardened fighters: 21 civilians executed in cold blood by forces linked to Syria's defense and interior ministries. These were not combat deaths but deliberate field executions meant to terrorize. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights documented each killing, revealing a pattern of sectarian vengeance the new government seemed unable or unwilling to stop. Local leaders who had maintained peace for decades suddenly found themselves powerless as young fighters on both sides demanded blood for blood. Israel's military operation revealed capabilities that stunned analysts worldwide. Using advanced satellite systems, Israeli forces tracked every Syrian convoy moving south in real time, striking with pinpoint accuracy before troops could reach their destinations. 160 strikes in just 48 hours, a pace of destruction that overwhelmed Syrian defenses. Israeli jets operated with impunity, their electronic warfare suites rendering Syrian air defenses useless. Yet this was not merely about military supremacy, it was about creating facts on the ground while global attention remained fixed on Gaza. Israel systematically dismantled Syrian infrastructure in the south, ensuring Damascus could not project power into areas Israel deemed strategic. Analysts noted a clear pattern: first command centers, then supply routes, finally any unit daring to move south. The message was unmistakable: southern Syria now lay under de facto Israeli control. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had labeled Syria's new leadership an extremist Islamic regime, and these strikes showed he intended to prevent it from consolidating power near Israel's borders. Every destroyed tank, every burning convoy, strengthened Israel's position for whatever came next. Syria's new leader Ahmed al-Shara faced an impossible dilemma that exposed his government's core weakness: withdraw from Suwayda and appear powerless to enforce state authority, or remain and risk devastating Israeli strikes that could topple his fragile regime. In a rare admission, Shara revealed that Syria and Israel were engaged in indirect negotiations, talks neither side wished to acknowledge publicly. The young leader, who had fought for years to overthrow Assad, now found himself trapped by forces beyond his control. His Islamic fighters, battle-hardened from years of civil war, were useless against Israeli air power. Worse, their presence in Druze areas only inflamed sectarian tensions his government desperately needed to calm. Intelligence sources suggested Shara received multiple warnings through intermediaries. Each Israeli strike would escalate until Syrian forces fully withdrew from the south. But withdrawal meant admitting his government could not control its own territory, potentially sparking rebellions in other minority regions. Behind closed doors, advisors argued bitterly. Some urged resistance to Israeli aggression, others warned that confrontation meant certain destruction. The deal being negotiated in secret was Syria's humiliation wrapped as compromise. Ceasefire proclamations became a tragic farce as each agreement collapsed within hours. Interior Ministry officials announced a pact with notables and dignitaries of Suwayda, detailing police deployments and full integration into the Syrian state. Druze spiritual leader Sheikh Youssef Jarboe confirmed the accord, urging an immediate halt to military operations. Yet even as officials clasped hands, Israeli jets thundered overhead, delivering fresh strikes that mocked any truce. The sharpest split came when Sheikh Hikmat al-Hydri, another influential Druze figure, rejected the deal outright and told his followers to keep fighting. His militias, including the newly formed Suwayda military council pact with former Syrian army officers, refused to disarm. Each faction interpreted the ceasefire differently. Some saw surrender, others a tactical pause. Israeli commanders declared they would continue striking regardless of agreements, viewing Syrian promises as worthless. By the third failed ceasefire, exhausted negotiators accepted the truth. Peace was impossible while multiple powers pursued clashing agendas. The accords failed not from misunderstanding but because every side entered talks intending to break them. Regional reactions exposed the Middle East's new fault lines with startling clarity. Saudi Arabia's foreign ministry issued a blistering statement condemning Israel's continued blatant attacks and flagrant violation of international law, demanding swift international action. Riyadh's fury ran deep. The kingdom had invested heavily in Syria's reconstruction to counter Iranian influence, and Israeli strikes threatened those plans. Iran, despite its recent war with Israel, mustered enough strength to denounce the raids as unhinged aggression. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi vowed that Tehran would always stand with the Syrian people, though Iran's weakened position rendered the promise hollow. The Arab League's emergency session devolved into shouting matches, members split between punishing Israel and privately welcoming the blow to Syria's Islamist government. Qatar and the UAE issued measured condemnations while quietly calculating how the chaos might serve their ambitions. Even the European Union voiced deep concern, diplomatic code for paralysis. United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres condemned violations of Syria's sovereignty, but everyone knew his words held little weight. Hidden among the Damascus casualties were Iranian military advisors whose presence was never meant to be public. Israeli intelligence had tracked these ghosts for months, waiting for the perfect moment to eliminate them alongside Syrian targets. Tehran's shock was not only losing personnel but discovering how deeply Israeli operatives had infiltrated their networks. The advisors supposedly employed advanced counter-surveillance, yet Israel knew their exact rooms inside the defense ministry. The breach pointed to either high-level infiltration or technology Iran could not counter. The proxy war dynamics that had shaped Syria for over a decade shifted overnight. Iran now stood exposed just when its Syrian allies most needed support. Analysts noted Israel's timing. Striking while Iran still reeled from recent clashes, Hezbollah remained weakened, and Syria's new government had yet to consolidate power. The message to Tehran was stark. Your era of using Syria as a forward base is ending. Each dead advisor erased years of investment and influence in seconds, as the intricate networks Iran built since the civil war's onset unraveled beyond repair. The regional conflict scenarios unfolding before our eyes paint a terrifying picture of what is coming next. Military strategists warn that Israel's strikes on Damascus represent only the opening moves in a much larger game. Syria's fragmentation is accelerating at breakneck speed. The country that survived 14 years of civil war might not survive 14 months of its supposed peace. Each Israeli strike creates new autonomous zones, new militia territories, new reasons for communities to arm themselves against neighbors. The Druze situation now serves as a template for what could befall Syria's Christians, Alawites, Kurds, and other minorities. Israel's long-term plans for southern Syria grow clearer with each passing day, a buffer zone extending far beyond the Golan Heights. Defense sources suggest Israel aims to establish a 40-kilometer-deep security belt inside Syria, effectively annexing territory without formal declaration. This is not about temporary security measures but permanent facts on the ground. Diplomats lose sleep over a nightmare scenario in which Syria splinters into ethnic cantons, each backed by competing regional powers. Turkey claims the north, Israel secures the south, Iran fights to maintain corridors to Lebanon, and Gulf states bankroll their preferred factions. What we are witnessing is not just another Middle Eastern crisis, it is the violent redrawing of maps drafted a century ago. Secret negotiations underway right now would shock those who believe these enemies never talk. Through American and Russian intermediaries, Israel and Syria are hammering out deals that officially do not exist. United States Special Envoy Tom Barak shuttles between capitals with messages neither side will acknowledge sending. Leaked core Israeli demands include complete Syrian withdrawal from areas bordering the Golan, disbanding of Druze militias that might threaten Israel, and, most controversially, Syrian recognition of Israeli sovereignty over occupied territories. In exchange, Israel offers to halt strikes and allow humanitarian aid to flow. Yet the real talks revolve around partition. Sources indicate Israel has proposed autonomous zones for minorities, each under international protection but effectively guaranteed by Israeli security. Syria's negotiators, desperate to salvage something from the wreckage, are seriously considering the plan. The deal would transform Syria from a unitary state into a federation of ethnic enclaves. Ahmed al-Shara now faces a stark choice: accept partition or watch his country disintegrate entirely. Russian mediators push for any agreement that preserves their military bases, while American officials view the chaos as a chance to reshape the entire region. These are not peace talks. They are discussions on managing Syria's dissolution. History screams warnings that few wish to hear. The parallels to Lebanon in 1982 are impossible to ignore. Israel entered to protect allies, promising limited operations that morphed into 18 years of occupation. Senior Israeli officers who served in Lebanon privately voiced concerns about mission creep, yet political leaders shrugged them off. The minority protection justification echoes through time as the classic pretext for intervention. From the Ottoman Empire's collapse to Yugoslavia's disintegration, external powers have always claimed noble motives while pursuing strategic interests. Syria's minorities are pawns, not protected peoples. Just as Israel once backed Lebanese Christians against Muslims, it now casts itself as Druze guardian against Sunni dominance. But history shows such interventions never end cleanly. Protected minorities become permanent dependents, buffer zones turn into lasting occupations, temporary measures harden into new borders. Former intelligence chiefs warned the government to learn from past mistakes, but members of Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition see Lebanon's occupation as a model, not a cautionary tale. They imagine a dismembered Syria guaranteeing Israel's security, forgetting that Lebanon's chaos ultimately threatened Israel more than Assad's hostility ever did. Every historical parallel points to the same verdict. Intervention spawns more problems than it solves. A fierce propaganda war rages across social media platforms, shaping perceptions as powerfully as actual bombs. Israeli military accounts flood X with videos of precision strikes, highlighting surgical accuracy and minimal civilian casualties. Syrian government channels counter with images of destroyed homes and wounded children, portraying Israel as an aggressor terrorizing innocents. Yet the real battle unfolds in Arabic-language telegram groups where sectarian hatred spreads like wildfire. Druze accounts post footage of government atrocities, demanding Israeli protection. Sunni channels brand the Druze traitors, labeling them Zionist collaborators deserving death. Deepfake videos proliferate. Some show Druze leaders praising Israel, others depict Israeli soldiers committing atrocities. Fact-checkers cannot keep pace with the disinformation deluge. Bot armies amplify every incident into an existential threat that requires immediate violence. This information battlefield fuels real-world bloodshed as communities believe the worst about one another. Intelligence services from multiple nations run competing influence campaigns, each pushing narratives that suit their interests. Truth becomes the first casualty as every side musters evidence for predetermined conclusions. Young fighters make life-and-death decisions based on viral videos that may be entirely fabricated, ensuring that even if the guns fall silent, hatred will endure for generations. The next phase of this crisis hinges on specific triggers that could set the whole region ablaze. Watch for these indicators: Israeli ground forces moving deeper into Syria, Iranian weapons convoys destined for Hezbollah, or a Turkish incursion to block Kurdish autonomy. Alliances shift at dizzying speed. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates inch toward recognizing Israel's actions as legitimate while maintaining public condemnation. Egypt quietly coordinates with Israel to stem refugee flows, whereas Jordan fears another influx of displaced Syrians. The wild card is Russia. Vladimir Putin's tolerance for Israeli strikes has limits, especially if they endanger Russian bases. A single miscalculated hit on Russian assets could escalate a local war into a superpower confrontation. Oil markets already price in disruption scenarios, and defense contractors see share values soar as regional powers accelerate arms purchases. United Nations planners brace for potentially 1 million new refugees should Syria collapse entirely. Each day without de-escalation raises the odds of wider war. Intelligence chatter grows about preemptive strikes, defensive preparations, and alliance obligations. The fuse is lit. The only question is how long before detonation. Post-Assad Syria's vulnerability now stands exposed for all to see. The government that toppled a 40-year dictatorship cannot protect its own capital's airspace, let alone distant provinces. Israel's strategic window of opportunity will not remain open forever, so it moves quickly to establish new realities before Syria stabilizes or international pressure mounts. These strikes demonstrate to every Syrian minority that the central government cannot shield them, accelerating centrifugal forces already tearing the country apart. Other regional powers take note. If Israel can operate with impunity, why can they not? The Middle East's emerging power dynamics crystallize around a stark truth. Syria exists as a geographic expression, not a functioning state. Traditional Arab nationalism lies dead, replaced by sectarian calculations and foreign patronage. The dream of unified resistance against Israel ended with Bashar al-Assad's fall. Now each group cuts separate deals for survival. Iran's axis of resistance fragments as its components prioritize local interests over ideological solidarity. Syria's crisis marks the end of the post-Great War Middle East and the violent birth of something new. Whether that something will prove better or worse is yet to be written, in blood and in tears. One reality, however, is certain. The old rules no longer apply, and everyone is scrambling to master the new game before they become its next victims.